Hello and welcome to another episode of the Health Notebook. This evening we're discussing childhood immunizations and we have a pediatrician, Dr. Walele, in the studio. Dr. Walele, welcome to the studio.
Shukran.
Can you maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself? You're a pediatrician. Can you even just tell us about your life? Where are you now in your life as well, and where have you practiced before as well?
Right. Shukran. I am a pediatrician of more than 20 years qualifications. I qualified initially at the University of Natal Medical School. Subsequently, I did my postgraduate training at the University of Stellenbosch in Cape Town, and I'm presently working in public service in the pediatric field, and I'm head of Department of Pediatrics in my facility right now.
Okay. As you mentioned, you're a pediatrician. Is there any specific field of interest, or is there any specific area of pediatrics that you prefer?
I do. I have a specific interest in vaccines, in infectious diseases, and I am presently a member of the European Society of Pediatric Infectious Diseases, as well as the South African Society for Pediatric Infectious Diseases. I also do many clinical studies and research in this particular field.
Okay, so as you mentioned, one of your areas of interest is vaccines and immunizations, and this evening that is our topic. So can you just tell us, what is a vaccine?
Correct. Thank you for the question. Vaccines are medicinal products. They're produced using quite stringent pharmaceutical methods to ensure their safety and their efficacy. And what they do is that they evoke a response from your body to allow you to mimic and protect you from the natural infection against which the vaccine is produced.
Okay, so what you're actually saying is that you have the vaccine in your body, and when we have a foreign bacteria that comes along, it actually prevents that particular infection or virus from going through your body and developing a particular illness. Is that correct?
That is correct. The vaccine is designed against a specific bacteria or virus, or in some cases like malaria, which is called a protozoan, and it allows the body to develop a response so that when you are faced with the natural infection, your body is already primed against that infection.
Okay, so when you're speaking about the natural infection, can you maybe give us one or two examples of the natural infection and its normal run, and then just an idea of how the vaccine would actually work if you were to encounter a particular infection? So just an idea of a natural infection, and then what vaccine is available to prevent that particular medical illness.
Certainly, I'd go back to a historical phenomenon, and I'll go to an initial or present phenomenon. So let's deal with the historic phenomenon first. Years and years ago, we had a disease called smallpox, which killed many, many people. So much so that it was almost a death sentence if you got smallpox as a child or even as an adult. However, if you look at the history books, and there was a person by the name of Edward Jenner who initially discovered that cowpox can prevent smallpox, and in so doing he was one of the first pioneers in developing vaccines against common illnesses. So much so that we've come from that era to a point where smallpox is completely eradicated. And that's one of the successes of what vaccines can do for you. The second is measles. Now, everyone is aware of what measles can do. Measles can kill children and does so. And Measles has also provided a success story in many, many countries, especially the poverty-stricken ones. However, because of vaccines not being utilized as widely as what they should be in certain of the developed countries, measles is coming back to the fore and actually killing children again.
Okay, so when you speak about vaccines and the developed countries, we South Africa, we have our own vaccine sort of a schedule. Can you just elaborate a little bit more about that particular schedule, or what's the mandatory vaccine? You have a newborn kid or newborn child. What are the mandatory vaccinations that this particular newborn requires?
Right. There are two vaccination schedules in South Africa. There's one that is given free of charge by the National Department of Health, and there's also the private sector, which might include one or two extra vaccines in their vaccine schedule. The Department of Health has made many, many great strides in providing vaccines and safe vaccines to South Africans. We have by far one of the most progressive vaccine schedules in the entire continent, and possibly even around the world as well, where the Department of Health has invested heavily into providing as much vaccines as possible.
Okay. And when you mean by we have one of the best vaccine schedules available, can you just give us a comparison in terms of other countries where we are, or in terms of other developing nations in terms of vaccination?
Certainly. If you compare South Africa to some of the developed countries, we're more or less on par with what their vaccine schedules are. They may have one or two extra vaccines on their schedules, but that is largely dependent on what your current trends are in diseases in those countries. In South Africa, for example, we provide BCG, which is the TB vaccine. We provide polio. We provide vaccine against rotavirus, which causes gastroenteritis. We provide vaccines against a very bad disease called pneumococcal infection, and that vaccine is called Prevnar. And there are a number of other vaccines as well.
You've mentioned the TB vaccine. Can you maybe just give us a comparison compared to that vaccine and the TB that you get nowadays? I mean, can you just give the viewers some type of idea of that particular TB vaccine?
Right. The TB vaccine is called BCG. BCG protects your child as well as even up to adolescence in certain instances against severe forms of tuberculosis.
So that's not the same form of tuberculosis that you would get, for example, the respiratory tuberculosis. They're two separate forms, is that correct?
They're two separate forms. Your BCG does protect to a certain extent against that, but not entirely.
Okay, so you're still at risk of developing the common tuberculosis of the lung?
You are.
Okay. And then just, can you maybe elaborate on the time frames for the newborn, right? You've given us a range of vaccines. At how many months should these vaccines be administered?
Right. Every baby in this country should get what's called a Road to Health book. And in that book, the entire vaccination schedule is in there. There's a couple of adaptations to that as your baby grows in terms of when and where your baby may get the vaccine. But in general, your baby should be getting BCG and polio drops even before your baby leaves the hospital.
Okay. So there are mandatory vaccinations that is required before you leave the hospital. Let's assume this particular child has some type of complication. What happens in that particular situation? Are you still allowed to have the vaccination, or should the vaccinations be postponed?
Right. There are very few reasons why a child with some kind of complication should not get a vaccine. And in many of those cases, these children can still receive a vaccine under very, very controlled circumstances. For example, if a child has got an egg allergy, many vaccines are produced from chick embryos, and these children with severe egg allergies, where they get what's called anaphylactic or allergic reactions, they can still be administered under very controlled circumstances to gain the benefit of the vaccine itself.
Okay.
There are severe cases of immunodeficiency where vaccines might become problematic, but there are also alternative methods of then protecting that child from these common illnesses.
Okay, so now you've given the child the vaccination during the first years of life. Does the vaccination wear off, and do I require to vaccinate the child again?
Vaccines do wear off with time in many instances, which is why the Department of Health has got various time periods for administering vaccines. So this is what's called the booster effect. So every time you go back for that particular vaccine, it compounds or boosts the immunity which has been developed previously against that particular disease. However, once you come beyond the 18-month period, which is from birth to 18 months, which is the crucial period where most of these vaccines are given, there is a time period where there's no vaccine which is then given to your child until school entry and until adolescence. And these are called the booster vaccines.
Okay. Can you maybe give us one example of the booster vaccines, and why is it necessary to have the booster vaccine?
Certainly, if you look at 2 or 3 diseases, one which would be tetanus, secondly diphtheria, and thirdly pertussis, also known as whooping cough.
Okay.
These vaccines require boosters at various stages of your life, simply because the immunity wanes as you grow.
So you say the lifespan becomes, so the vaccines have a lifespan?
They do.
Okay.
And your immunity starts going down, in which case you have to remind your body once more that you need a booster dose of vaccine. And that is why, for example, adolescents, adults, and even the elderly can harbor or keep these organisms or develop the illness, and for which they can become infectious towards other children as well. So it is important to remember those boosters in particular, because they're not only protecting you, the individual, they're also protecting your family and the community at large.
Okay, so we've touched a little bit on the vaccination, the vaccination schedule. You've given us some idea of those individuals that will have a reaction to the vaccine in terms of allergy. What about side effects of vaccinations?
Potentially, all vaccines will have side effects. It is what we call reactogenicity. You want to have some minor side effects to provide evidence that your vaccine has taken some kind of effect on your body. For example, if you give the BCG vaccine, you're actually wanting to develop a scar to provide future evidence that the vaccine was administered. Some other vaccines have got local side effects. Some have got systemic side effects.
So when you mean local, what do you actually mean by local side effects?
In other words, once a vaccine has been given, it's usually by injection at present. You would have some pain, some redness, maybe some swelling at your injection site. However, you might have a mild fever, you might have a mild runny nose, even a little bit of diarrhea, for example, or at an extreme, maybe even a skin rash.
Okay.
But
so
one
that
has
is
to
just for a limited period of time.
Correct. That's
Okay.
for a limited period of time, simply because one has to remember that the actual disease would cause a lot more harm.
What's been coming out from the media is opinions about vaccinations and autism. There's a link over there. Can you maybe give us your opinion about the link between vaccinations and autism? Is there any definite link?
That is a very important question. There is absolutely no link between vaccines and autism. There was a research paper which was produced quite some time ago, for which the lead investigator or author of the paper was deemed to be fraudulent, in which the journal actually retracted the article linking MMR, which is the measles, mumps and rubella vaccine, with autism. So that particular piece of vaccine relationship to autism, in fact, is historical. It should not exist at all in people's minds.
Okay. I know it's flu season coming up. What's your opinion about giving children flu vaccinations?
Certainly, children deserve to get flu vaccines because they actually harbor influenza. The uptake of flu vaccine in this country is not as great as what it should be. It's in fact quite poor. And it is important for the elderly, children, as well as pregnant women to get the flu vaccine, not only to protect themselves, but also to protect their families, their unborn children as well, and their children after birth for at least the first 6 months of life.
Okay. Moving over to a slightly different aspect of vaccinations. Let's assume you have a child that's going to be traveling abroad. Is there another range of vaccination that that particular child needs, and what's your take on that?
Yes, up till now we've been talking about childhood vaccinations,
Yeah.
but vaccinations are not the realm of children only, because it's important for adults, adolescents, pregnant women, as well as travelers to get certain vaccines. Different countries have got different requirements for vaccines before they will allow you into the country.
Okay.
And different countries have got different disease profiles for which you need to be protected against before you actually get there.
So irrespective if you're a child or an adult or an elderly person, you still require those vaccinations to enter those particular countries?
If it's the country's legal requirement that you vaccinate against a particular disease, then you need to get that particular vaccine before you actually enter the country. There are also optional vaccines for travelers, which is not really nice to have, but always recommended.
Okay.
To protect yourself further if you so wish.
Okay. Just another important aspect of vaccinations. Over the past 4 to 5 years, there have been a number of new vaccinations that have been brought to the market. I know there's one in particular that sort of prevents cervical cancer. Can you just explain to the viewers as well about the new vaccination that is available?
There are 2 vaccines that are registered for cervical cancer in this country. Cervical cancer is usually caused by a virus called Hpv, which stands for human papillomavirus. Both these vaccines protect the individual against cervical cancer, and cervical cancer is a big killer of women in this country, not only because of late diagnoses, but because in the past we never had these preventative measures. Now, one of the greatest interventions that the Department of Health has done is starting to give cervical cancer or HPV vaccine to grade 4s in schools on a 2-dose schedule. And the children receive this at school. And in doing so, we're hoping to reap the benefits of this in the future 15 to 20 years time. It's similar to the introduction of the hepatitis B vaccines 20 to 30 years ago, where we actually have seen a dramatic fall in liver cancer in this country from that particular cause.
Okay. Dr. Walele, before we end the show, can you just sum up the most important aspects for vaccinations?
I believe there are people out there who may read certain news articles which may question the fact that vaccines might be bad for you. Let me reassure all the listeners, vaccines have nothing but benefit to you, your child, and your society. If you have any questions regarding vaccines, please contact your local clinic sister, whether it's in the public or private sector, or your local doctor in the public or private sector as well. There are a number of good websites regarding vaccinations, and I would strongly suggest that people could go to a website called cdc.gov, and look at vaccines and the advantages thereof.
So all the information would be available in terms of the questions and the side effects on that particular website?
Absolutely correct. How the vaccine is manufactured, the questions regarding the vaccine, the side effects regarding the vaccine, and what happens to you, and the schedules.
Okay. Dr. Walele, it's been a pleasure having you in the studio. We hope to see you again on the show. Thank you very much for watching this episode of the Health Notebook. Stay tuned for another episode, same time, same place, next week.